On behalf of our Converge and our Central staff, I want to welcome you to our time together. Now, normally, we'd be gathering in person, renewing friendships, making new connections, being inspired and challenged, as well as doing the business of our movement. But I don't need to remind you that normal has left the building. Coming into 2020, most of us had a Skype account that we rarely used. And then, come March, when COVID-19 hits, everybody has a Zoom account, and ministry is filling your days full of appointments and full of meetings, all online. Prior to this year, less than 10% of churches in America had a regular, consistent online worship service streamed. But then, all of a sudden, online worship wasn't just the domain of large techie churches, but every church had to figure out how to get online, how to take their services into a virtual world. And not just services, but also how do you do teaching? How do you do care? How do you do engagement? How do you connect with people in a virtual world? Then churches had to learn how to navigate the government CARES Act and protocols and guidelines and to do new things, all amidst this ever-changing pandemic landscape. And then the time came where we were allowed to resume face-to-face worship services. But many of us had to pause and consider for a moment what that would look like and what that would take. There were government mandates and protocols and guidelines on how many people could gather and occupancy and cleaning regulations. And every church had to figure out in their own timing how they would reopen and when they would reopen. And if all of this weren't enough, what happened on May 25th in the street outside of a grocery store in South Minneapolis brought even more uncertainty and brought even more unrest. The killing of George Floyd did not create the unrest, rather it revealed the unrest that was already present. A number of Converge churches, both within the Twin Cities and outside the greater metropolitan area, called us and asked how can they respond? How could they respond to what was going on? And yes, food was needed and supplies were needed and cleanup was needed, but these churches, they were looking for a way they could make a long-term commitment. How could they be involved and respond to the needs over the long run? So we were able to connect them with other CNC churches down in the areas that needed the most help. And they set up tables to give away food and supplies. One of them is City View Church here in South Minneapolis, 8 blocks from where George Floyd was killed. The pastor of City View is Walt McFadden. Walt, thanks for meeting with us here.
Joel?
Walt, what was it like the days, the weeks, the months kind of following the events of May 25th?
There were no gas stations or grocery stores open anywhere in the neighborhood, so people lacked the basic needs and essentials of life. And Converge churches responded in a big way. They brought thousands of diapers, for example, shampoo, food, all the things that people normally would be able to get access to. The great thing is that some of them continued through the rest of the summer, just up until a few weeks ago. And we've been able to develop long-term relationships with people in the community. In fact, some people got baptized, and now we're in the process of discipling them and having them become a part of the church.
So one night you were giving out food and preaching the gospel in the parking lot, and the next night you were baptizing people.
Sometimes the same day, Joel.
That's cool. Thanks, Walt. As a national movement, Converge has been addressing the idea of biblical diversity and what it would look like to our churches and to our faith. Our world's a diverse world, and Minnesota and Iowa is diverse as well. We want to reach people of all classes, all culture, all backgrounds, and show to them how we together can bring reconciliation and collaboration for the sake of the gospel of Jesus Christ. Amidst all of this, like many of our churches, the ministries of Converge and our Central also had to adapt and pivot. Our camps, Trout Lake in Minnesota and Pine Lake in Iowa, they were especially challenged during this time, but they were both able to reopen. They reopened under strict guidelines and strict protocols, and God blessed them with 0 illnesses and 0 incidents. In fact, between the two camps, 175 campers made a first-time decision for Jesus Christ. 281 made a significant spiritual commitment, and 19 felt the call by God for full-time Christian service. In church planting, we continue to network, encourage, resource, and tell the story of our church planting churches. Conversations continue with potential church planting candidates who hope to sow seeds of the gospel with new churches. We anticipate God doing great things in our church planting ministry within the next year and a half. Our church strengthening continues in high gear as we are developing partnerships with other churches and organizations so we can bring valuable tools to our churches and pastors to help them be more effective in the ministries that God has called them to do. And P3, our pastoral placement process, is quite active as we continue to work with churches who are seeking new senior leadership. And we are rolling out this year P3 Next, which is to serve associate pastors in filling those positions. 2020 has been a year to remember, or a year to forget. You've been challenged with topics that weren't covered in any of your seminary or Bible school classes. Prior to March, nobody was writing books on how to minister during a pandemic. Prior to March, nobody was doing podcasts on how to lead a church during COVID-19. Add in racial tensions and an ever polarizing culture, and it seems that the challenges before all of us are daunting. We are ministering in an ever-changing, on-demand world. And it's hard to step forward in confidence when you're stepping into the unknown. Today in our time together, we want to challenge you and we want to encourage you. People are hungry for hope. We are not on pause. Our mission has not ended. Now more than ever, the church needs to engage in this on-demand world. We have 3 speakers for you today. The first one is John Fuller. John's going to talk about how we need to be more proactive in the world around us as churches and leaders. Following John, Steph O'Brien is going to narrow the beam and talk about leadership and how in this ever-changing world we need to be more agile in our leadership and what that will take and what that looks like to be agile leaders. And finally, Dr. Harold Lewis, he was going to talk about biblical diversity, and not just about engaging with the idea of biblical diversity, but providing us practical and meaningful steps that we can begin to use so we can have our lives and our ministries and our churches reflect the idea of biblical diversity. Often it seems that the task is overwhelming, but the mission of the church has not changed. We take to heart the words that Mordecai told Queen Esther, and we cling to them in 2020. Where he told her that she was made for this moment. We don't get to choose our moment, but we seize the moment that God has given us. And our hope is that during our time together today, you will be encouraged and you will be blessed as we move forward with the mission that God has for each one of us.